Welcome everyone to the Dragonflight 10.3 Retribution Paladin Guide. My name is Gore, and this guide will teach you everything you need to know going into Season 4 of Mythic Plus and the Awakened Raids. Going into 10.3, our baseline spec hasn't received much changes, and thus our core model and talents remain the same. The Retribution Paladin is a DPS spec with a gainer-spender model, with the primary resource being Holy Power. We gain Holy Power through our core resource generation abilities and spend it to do single target damage, AoE damage, or healing. Our core resource generation abilities are Crusader Strike, Blade of Justice, Judgment, and Hammer of Wrath. You will additionally always talent into Wake of Ashes and Divine Toll, which are longer talent cooldowns that also provide Holy Power. Our core abilities all gain 1 or 2 Holy Power dependent on talents, while Wake always gives 3, and Divine Toll varies with the number of targets and talents. Our core spenders are Final Verdict for single target, Divine Storm for AoE, and Word of Glory for healing. Technically you can equip a shield and use Shield of the Righteous, but no one does that. Final Verdict and Divine Storm cost 3 or 4 Holy Power dependent on talents, while Word of Glory will always cost 3. Our major damage cooldowns include Avenging Wrath or Crusade, which is a 1 minute versus 2 minute cooldown of our iconic Wings ability. For single target, Execution Sentence is a 30-second cooldown that repeats a portion of our damage. For AoE, Final Reckoning is a 1 minute cooldown that increases spender damage by 30% and also has a large damage component. We have 2 core passives. First, Mastery Hand of Light, which increases our holy damage by 1% for every 1% of mastery. Since almost every ability we have does holy damage, and consistently every patch 90% or more of our total damage is holy, it is simplest to think that every 1% of mastery increases our damage by almost 1%. Our other passive is Instruments of Retribution, which gives us Avenging Wrath for 9 seconds when a party or raid member dies. Retribution Utility is considered the best in the game for a DPS spec. We provide literally a bit of everything you want for all content. We have raid buffs in Devotion Aura and Retribution Aura. We have Poison and Disease Dispel, which is looking very important for 10.2 and plus. A 15-second kick, an AoE Disorient/Interrupt, a 6-second single target stun, a movement impairment immunity, a 30% damage reduction we can give others, and a good bit of passive healing, a physical immunity that can be given out, and an instant full health heal that can also be given out. We also have a taunt and single target heals that are quite literally stronger than a healer's, such as Word of Glory. Retribution Paladin is the tankiest non-tank spec in the game by miles. Through our various passives that give us more HP than most specs, and reduce all incoming damage by a large percentage, self-heals, auto-heals, multiple immunities, and multiple short CD defensives, we are unrivaled in this department. Like honestly, it just isn't even close. Retribution is the hero class. As our allies fall around us, you alone are sometimes able to go the final distance and secure the win. Retribution Paladin always struggles with mobility. We have 2 main options. Divine Seed is our primary movement ability, which lasts 4 seconds. You can talent into it multiple times to make it last 2 additional seconds and also have 2 charges instead of 1. Additionally, you can talent into Unbound Freedom to gain 8 seconds of a 30% movement buff. For Rep Paladin, we only really have 2 talent builds, but I like to say we have 3. We have our single target build, which can be seen here on screen. This build focuses on dealing large single target damage every 1 minute with slightly smaller bursts every 30 seconds. This build is great for raiding, and it is your default and universal raiding build. If you aren't sure what build to run for a raid fight, you usually can't go wrong with this one. Rep Paladin currently has one of the highest single target damage in the game with this build. This tree's main issue is that it has essentially no capacity to deal damage to more than 1 target. The second build you want is your M+ build. This build on screen is my personal universal M+ build. I run this build in almost every dungeon and for almost every affix. You will occasionally swap around a few talents in the class tree such as Unbound Freedom and Turn Evil for the respective affix weeks, but the class tree remains generally untouched. You can potentially move a point from Searing Light to Divine Arbiter for tyrannical weeks, but I've found that this usually isn't worth doing, and instead you can gain more single target damage from other sources such as trinkets. This build focuses on maximizing your ability to AoE as well as cleave without giving up all of your single target. Putting points into Blessed Champion, Blade of Vengeance, Tempest of the Lightbringer, Final Reckoning, and Searing Light pretty much carry all of your AoE damage. Unfortunately for Ret, although not as big as it was in previous seasons, you still lose a good chunk of single target damage to gain your basic AoE kit. However, because Ret's single target damage is much higher than other classes right now, this loss is acceptable, and Ret continues to be one of the top 5 DPS specs right now for M+, arguably top 3. The third build you want is my hybrid build. While not a real build, but rather a mishmash of 3 to 4 slightly different builds, this is my attempt to maintain the very high single target of the first build while having some cleave. This build has a few points of flexibility and is focused on gaining DPS in situations of 2 targets. The flexibility part allows you to gain DPS of up to 5 targets while funneling/prioing into 1 target. All versions of this hybrid build come with drawbacks and will not be the best at anything, as it is sacrificing both single target and AoE components to essentially create what I like to call a Frankenstein build. I would suggest staying away from this build until you have mastered the basics of Ret, the other 2 builds, and have a strong understanding of the talents as well as the pros and cons of the options and choices within such Frankenstein builds. Our 10.2 tier set increases the duration of expurgation by about 40% and its damage by about 30%. When expurgation is on a target you cast Judgment on, which is by the way a 100% uptime on expurgation, Judgment essentially does a bonus 100% damage. Additionally, you can hit up to 4 additional targets for another 200% worth of Judgment's damage. The 4 set makes it so that when we deal this bonus damage, our next spender echoes to deal another 25% bonus damage. Echoes can trigger some effects. For instance, if you use Divine Storm with an echo proc and you have Tempest of the Lightbringer talented, you will send out 4 Divine Storms. Smiley face. Our 10.3 damage rotation is essentially identical to our 10.2 damage rotation. The only difference is in the opener, where you send your legendary axe as the 2nd or 3rd GCD. On the screen is everything you need to know about your single target opener, as well as your single target and AoE priority lists. I've also included a bunch of helpful tips and tricks and notes on the legendary. Skillfully weaving in echo procs without redundancy, while not overcapping holy power, has somewhat increased the skill ceiling of Ret, and this will lead to wider spread of Ret damage for those that can consistently do this well versus those that cannot, especially during Divine Toll windows. Having weak auras, such as those in my custom weak aura package, that can track your holy power, as well as CSAA and Divine Toll automatic holy power gains, can significantly help your holy power management. Our stat scaling has remained the same. However, because we are now deep into the expansion and eye level is going up dramatically, 39 eye levels to be exact, you will be hitting real levels of substat scaling penalties that will play into your stat priority decisions later into the tier. On the screen you can find how much stat is needed for Ret Paladin's various stats, as well as the universal substat scaling penalties. Note that these percentages for the penalties are rough estimations, and the actual penalties start on specific numbers, not percentages. However, this information is known to be accurate and is a good guideline. As for our stat priorities, we now prioritize haste and versatility the most, followed by crit, with mastery being the least important. Please note that stat priorities are just a guideline, and your character may need different stats or even contradict this list entirely. Please sim yourself. Going into 10.3, Enchants and Consumables are almost identical to 10.2 and can be seen on screen. The only changes is you will prefer Tepid Verse Vial over Corrupting Rage due to keeping uptime on Blue Silk Embellishment, and you will prioritize double substat food over main stat food. As for embellishments, you will use double blue silk as the scaling on this embellishment has gone crazy and gives over 1,000 mastery per. This will get you almost 2100 mastery with pretty high uptime. Now for gearing. Gearing in 10.3 is extremely easy. You have a nice rotation between catalyst charges, crafted gear, bullions, and your weekly vault. Every week of 10.3, you get a new catalyst charge to turn non-tier gear into tier, or occasionally certain pieces into different stats. Every other week, you get a crafted piece of gear starting week 1. This means weeks 1, 3, 5, etc. you can make another crafted piece. Every week, you get 1 bullion from defeating bosses in the Awakened raids. Every piece of gear costs 2 bullions. So you get 1 piece every 2 weeks, starting weeks 2, 4, 6, etc. And every week you will get your weekly vault. With bullions, every single piece of gear end game is essentially set between tier, crafted, and now bullions. Now let's talk bullions quickly. Your first bullion buy will be Scale of Awakening to get your 535 Leggo. Your Leggo buy is your single biggest increase. It's somewhere around 35 to 40,000 DPS. You will definitely want to get this first. Now, after that, you can either target your quote-unquote very rare rings seen on screen or go for your trinkets. Your best single target trinket by miles is the Anvil. Your best AoE trinket is Boon. Your best non-troll AoE trinket is Ashes. Eventually, you might want to get all 6 trinkets listed on screen, including the Tainted Rage Heart, if you are a high M+ enjoyer like myself. After trinkets and rings, you can also target the Sark Cape, and also the neck. However, I think these are not as important since the neck has a few similar options as seen on screen, and the cape sacrifices a lot of stamina for not a massive DPS gain. For strengths, Retribution Paladin has great AoE damage and some of the best tankiness and varied utility, including a raid buff of all DPS specs. Like Devo Aura, Retribution Aura has become a required raid buff, and thus means at least 2 Paladins will likely be in a raid group. This increases the chances that Retribution will see playtime and progression, along with their fantastic utility and defensive kits. Ultimately, damage tuning always changes, and specs are considered firstly on their utilities, defensiveness, and raid buffs, and secondarily on their damage. I suspect that Retribution Paladin will be a prime pick for both raid and M+ due to their damage profile, utility, and defensiveness. In conclusion, Retribution Paladin is shaping up to be a prime pick for all PvE content, and I can happily say that I can highly suggest playing this spec as either a main or an alt to pick up and learn. The spec is rather intuitive to play, the flow feels good, and does not take a lot of time to understand the basics. Being the only damage spec for the Paladin class, Blizzard has openly stated that they will make an effort to make Retribution Paladin always viable. All of the resources you saw in this video will be available in my Discord, which is linked below. Additionally, I will provide a few of the talent builds that you can use directly imported into the game in the description of this video, as well as in my Discord. If you enjoyed this guide and would like to see my other content such as high Mythic Plus and Mythic raiding gameplay from a Retribution Paladin perspective, please make sure to hit the subscribe button and turn on the notification bell to know when my next video goes live. I also will be making an effort to go over any changes that Blizzard released that will impact the general higher PvE community. I often post 3 times a week and sometimes even daily. If you think this specific video was very informative, please hit the like button or comment or even send it to a friend, as that helps greatly. I regularly discuss the state of Retribution Paladin as well as stream a lot of the content you can find on this YouTube channel first over on my Twitch, twitch.tv/Gore_gaming, and a link to that will also be in the description. Thank you all for taking the time to watch this video until the end, and I hope you enjoyed it. Forever the GOAT Retribution Paladin, Gorelock.